What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Week 8 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown. I'm your host, Jake Tribby. I couldn't be happier to be back for Week 8, and I'm joined by my co-host, Millionaire Maker winner, and one of the greatest spring football DFS players ever, Neil Orfield. And we have a very special guest this week, Furby from Run the Sims. Furby handles NFL and UFL projections for Run the Sims. He's a longtime spring football grinder, and he's already had one 5-figure win in UFL this season, plus a second place finish in the main GPP just last week. Simply put, Furby is really good at projecting these UFL players and playing UFL DFS, which is exactly why we got him on the show. Furby, how's it going? Thanks so much for joining the show.
Good. Excited to break down some football and maybe get another second place between me and Neil. So,
yeah, a lot of second place finishes on this show.
Is that 2 for you, Furby?
Yeah, that's 2 for me.
I missed that you got it this week, so we're tied up at 2 second place finishes each. I don't have the first place finish. I guess I do it in Showdown, but I don't.
Yeah, I got a Showdown last week and Sunday only, but haven't got a main slate win yet.
Yeah, so I think we have, like 60% of all second place finishes in the main UFL GPP on this show.
Yeah, Justin
right
has
now.
one too. So.
Oh, wow. Right. Yeah, so we need to get all 4 of us on. Well, and maybe I can swing a second eventually.
That's the goal.
Exactly. Yeah.
You want to get second.
Yeah. Always. We only play for second here. We leave the first to a man like Chris Wack who, we were happy to see him win last week, the other half of the Fantasy Points UFL projections. So congrats to Chris, of course, on the win. He actually told me that he let his baby, his 3-month-old, decide which defense he was going to play. So, and the baby chose San Antonio, which ended up getting him the win. So that kid certainly got a future in UFL DFS. All right. For those unaware, Fantasy Points has a UFL DFS product this year. You can get player projections, main slate ownership projections, an exclusive UFL DFS Discord channel where you can ask me, Neil, Chris, Johnny Proctor questions about the slate, access to my UFL articles, which will be behind the paywall every other week. We've also slashed the sticker price of our UFL product down to $70 for the rest of the season. And promo code UFL 2024 gets you an additional 15% off on top of it. You can get even more value from this product if you have access to ESPN Bet, because they're listing UFL player props. The menu's surprisingly deep. There are generally some pretty big discrepancies between these props and our projections. They actually just listed touchdown bets as well. So ESPN Bet is expanding the menu despite probably getting killed these last few weeks on player props by not only us, but I know the guys over at Run the Sims are doing a great job as well. So that makes for a great betting opportunity. And it also helps you realize a lot of the value of our UFL DFS product. But without further ado, guys, let's get into these games. Our first game this week is the Memphis Showboats at the Michigan Panthers. Memphis is an 8.5-point underdog. Total here is 47.5. This game kicks off Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern, so a later start than normal this week. Hopefully that can help us fill the contests a bit. I guess I see a little bit of value on Memphis, a little bit of value on the under. Probably, I think I may end up betting the under after the show. I'll shop around a bit here, but Furby, I'll throw it over to you. Any strong thoughts on the betting line for this first game here?
Not real strong. I mean, if I had to, I'm going to go Michigan to start. Certainly one where I want to watch, maybe live bet it, see how it's going, because I don't think in running. And if they are, if the first couple of drives they're able to stop them a couple of times, keep them in check a little bit. Definitely going to be hitting the under on that, but I just don't think they're going to be able to stop them. So might be more of a live betting game.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. Any additional thoughts, Neil?
Yeah, I think I'd take the under, if anything, just because I think Michigan probably will keep it on the ground. So maybe it'll be a little bit of a slower game, even if they have trouble slowing them down on the ground. But nothing else really for me. This is largely a stay away.
Gotcha. All right. So for injuries here, Troy Williams is going to be the emergency QB3 due to a chest and a finger injury. Case Cookus will be your starter for the Showboats. On the Michigan side, Danny Etling is the emergency QB3 for the second week in a row. He's still rehabbing that injury on his non-throwing hand. I'd expect a split between Brian Lewerke, who is the listed starter, and Bryce Perkins, who is the listed QB2. Cioce Mariner is also out due to a concussion he suffered on his 8th snap last week. Devin Ross is back from IR, and he's listed as the starter in Mariners' place. But Ross, unfortunately, is not in the player pool. I suppose there's a chance that DraftKings could update that, but I don't believe he's in there right now. And then wide receiver Terry Wright is also active for the first time all season. But we don't expect him to get a ton of run here. Starting with the Memphis side, I feel just like week after week after week, I've been tempted by Case Cookus, and it's never really gotten us there. Furby, I'll throw it over to you. I'm curious what you think about Memphis and this passing attack more broadly. I was really excited to play Dawood Davis, hopeful that Troy Williams would start. Now that it's Cookus, I still like Dawood. I'm not in love with him. Curious on your thoughts here.
My first thought was that they'd have a tough time against Michigan. And I got to look, and Michigan hasn't been that good against the pass. I mean, and Memphis, it's really been their defense. They've had plenty of problems on offense, and there's just not any quarterbacks this week that we know for sure, other than a couple are going to start and play the whole game. Cookus is in that boat. We're not real sure. They could pull the plug on him at any minute, but not having Williams makes it, sometimes I'm trying to find just a cheap quarterback. I wish this game was later that I could maybe pivot to him, but I'm probably not going to have a lot of him. But I'm definitely going to keep with Dawood. I think we have him about a 24% optimal rate right now. And I just think his floor is good. And I did know he has caught 2 of 15 deep targets this year. So he's run the most deep route, or had the most deep targets, but has got 2 of them. So part of that is probably that they're always under pressure, so they're terrible throws. But I think it's likely he's going to come down with a couple more of those at some point and have more of a ceiling game. But definitely in on Dawood this week.
Yeah, I think all that's fair. My biggest concern with Dawood is that Cookus just tends to underthrow those deep balls relative to Troy Williams. I would need to double check, but I would assume both of those completions were Troy Williams throws and not Cookus throws. That said, I do really like your point on Cookus. With Williams as the QB3, I really don't think this team wants Josh Love to play at all. I mean, we've never seen anything from Love that's very encouraging. So, Cookus will probably have a pretty long leash this week. Of course, he takes a pounding, so there's always just a risk he could get hurt, and you could see some Josh Love. But, he's projecting as a decent value for us, and I don't think he's going to be particularly high owned. So that certainly tempts me. Neil, I'm curious what you think here about Case Cookus and more broadly the Memphis passing attack.
Yeah, so I'm really torn on Cookus. I keep going back to, and as you know, Jake, I've been largely recently underweight on Adrian Martinez, spread out to all the other. Part of me is like, maybe these tournaments are not large enough that I need to be doing this. Maybe I should just play the cheat code quarterback Adrian Martinez a lot more than I have been. Just because even last week when he was kind of underwhelming, he was still kind of right there as a quarterback that he didn't kill you to have him, even though he was outperformed by Luis Perez, scored more fantasy points. Troy Williams, you can save some money there. So I'm a little bit torn. I'll say this: I would not play Case Cookus if I were playing 5 lineups. I wouldn't play him probably if I were playing, maybe I'd have a share if I played 10 possibly, but he's not somebody that I'm really interested in playing a lot of. If I end up maxing this, but I don't think I'm going to max it out this weekend, I might have a couple of shares of Case Cookus, not somewhere where I want to go overboard. I will say to Furby's point, I was actually going to say the exact same thing about, I think of Michigan's defense as being one of the better defenses in the league just because of the way they put pressure on the quarterback. But you actually look at the team defense stats for looking at weeks 5 through 7, they've actually been in the bottom half of the league in terms of yards that they're giving up per game. There are 3 teams that are giving up, 300, 400, between 300 and 400 yards per game. But there are several teams that are giving up, Houston, Birmingham, San Antonio, St. Louis, all giving up fewer yards per game than Michigan in the past 3 weeks. So they really aren't quite the strong defense that I thought they were. So I have some interest in Cookus. Again, not something that I'd play if I'm only playing a handful of lineups. I'll probably play a couple of shares of Case Cookus. And part of what you like there is also they do have kind of a condensed tree in terms of receivers that you can consider. Obviously, Dawood Davis out there plenty. Vinny Papali has really come along. He's actually run 75 routes, most on the team over the past 2 weeks. That was early in the year. He was getting targeted. It seemed like a fair amount when he was out there, but he didn't really have full route participation. He's kind of come along. Jonathan Adams still there in terms of route participation, has 9 targets over the past 2 weeks, so I think you can consider him. Sage Surratt, I think I'm maybe going to stop trying to make Sage Surratt happen after two total targets over the past 2 weeks. I thought he was better. And, he's had some decent weeks, but he's kind of fallen off. So I think you could play Case Cookus. He is cheap enough. You can stack him up. It's not the most expensive stack with Vinny Papale or Jonathan Adams, both under 7,000. Dawood Davis, obviously one of the better receivers in the league, 18 targets over the past 2 weeks. So there are ways you could stack it up that kind of make sense. Not a team that I'm really going to lean into this week. I still think the Michigan defense is, decent enough. But I'll probably have a couple of shares of Case Cookus, and I'll definitely have shares of outside of those lineups. I still have shares of Dawood Davis, Vinny Papale, maybe Jonathan Adams.
Yeah, I remain tempted by Cookus, but I think I'm pretty close to you in terms of what I expect my exposure to be. I imagine I'll play maybe 35 or 40 teams in the main GPP. We'll probably only end up with 3, 4, maybe 5 Cookus teams. Jonathan Adams has had a pretty notable price reduction. He's down to 6,600. I believe he opened the year at 8,200. So would be willing to take some shots there. And I believe he's seen his best usage in Case Cookus games. So, that also makes him a bit tempting. Moving on to the backfield, man, it is just really, really tough to get behind these guys when we're, only projecting Memphis for, maybe 15 rushing plays, not great rushing efficiency, especially against this Michigan front. We did see Titus Swen get a bit more run last week, but I believe that was largely due to the blowout script. That said, with an 8.5-8 point line here, we could see another blowout again. So there is some risk that, maybe Victor gets subbed out near the end of the game for a little more Titus Swen. Furby, I'm curious, how are you guys sort of projecting this backfield split? Because at least for us, Victor, Swen, neither is really popping as a compelling play.
We have Victor getting 60% of the overall rushing, including the quarterbacks, but it's still just not enough. They're just going to be passing a lot, and the efficiency on the ground's been terrible. So it's nice to see a 60%, rushing share, on anyone in the UFL, but I'll probably have a couple just because I like Victor, but I'm not going to have much. And he would be the only one I would consider in this backfield.
Yeah, I'm with you. You can still tell yourself a compelling story with Victor where it's like, look, if Memphis somehow manages to get a compelling lead here, 8 points or more, all of a sudden they could lean a little bit more into the ground game. They basically haven't run any plays inside the 5 or inside the 10, but if they do that this week, those should go to Victor for the most part, especially if they're playing from ahead. And the price is reasonable, so I can see the argument for it, but man, it is so hard to pull the trigger on someone who's been as inefficient as Victor is, who's, getting great shares of backfield work, but overall the backfield just really doesn't have much value. I believe it's the second least valuable backfield in the UFL ahead of only DC. Neil, any love for Darius Victor this week?
Yeah, I think you guys laid it out pretty well. Maybe I'll have a couple of shares. Definitely not a priority for me. And again, going back to the team defenses, even though Michigan's defense overall not quite as good as I think of it as being, over the past 3 weeks, only giving up 70 rush yards per game. That is second best in the league in terms of stopping the run. So yeah, really, really not a priority for me. Definitely not playing Swen. I might play a couple of shares of Victor.
Yep. Think all that makes a lot of sense. Moving on to the Michigan side, this is a really tough team to project. We'll talk about the backfield a bit later. That's the easy part, but the passing game, that is pretty tough here. So we loosely are projecting sort of a 50-50 split between Bryce Perkins and Brian Lewerke. That was basically exactly what we saw last week, at least in terms of raw pass attempts. And while, I think most people just watching last week's game would assume, oh yeah, Bryce Perkins is clearly a better quarterback than Brian Lewerke. I would agree with that. I'm just not necessarily sure the Michigan coaches see it that way, especially because Lewerke has been with the team longer than Perkins. So I feel like they still want a 50-50 split here, but it is tough. I could see Perkins just outright playing better and earning more snaps as the game goes on. But in my head, I kind of lean towards their plan just being an even split. And then it gets tricky again with these wide receivers. Like I mentioned earlier, no COC Mariner today. And that leaves Samson Nakua really picked up his role last week after Mariner got concussed. Nakua earned tied with Marcus Sims in terms of the team lead for both route share and target share, which was pretty impressive. The only problem is that Devin Ross is now back from IR. We are projecting Ross to get some work. He is a listed starter. That said, Ross was really only working out of the slot when he was, playing with Michigan in weeks 1 and 2. Samson Nakua, mostly an outside receiver, and Mariner was almost exclusively playing outside. So that does make things tricky. I lean towards Nakua getting more work than Ross here. I guess I wouldn't be shocked if Ross was a starter on the outside. I don't know. This whole situation is pretty tough, which is why I'm so glad we have Furby here. Furby, I'm curious, how are you guys projecting this quarterback situation? And then also, how are you sort of viewing these wide receivers now that we know there's going to be no COC Mariner this week?
I watched an interview with Nolan, not me, not listening to myself, but Mike Nolan. And he was saying that until Danny Etling gets back, it's going to be a rotation. And Lewerke's the starter, so I mean, it's kind of takes. I have no interest in starting Lewerke after watching last week and their desire to run. I would take some shots on Perkins if I would have loved it if he was a starter. Just from what he's done back in his college days rushing and NFL preseason, he's definitely looking to run and make plays, and make something happen. But I don't think there's enough there. I think maybe 50-50, 60-40, one way or the other. They're pretty content on having a platoon this week.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And then anything else on Nakua or these pass catchers more broadly? Because I view Nakua as probably one of the toughest projections of the week.
Yeah, I thought he was going to be mega chalk this week, and I was excited.
And he still might be.
Yeah, but with Ross as a starter coming back, now Ross was second in 22 on this Panthers team in targets. He's on the smaller slot guy, so I don't really think it'd be the same role competing, directly with Nakua. And then they have Terry Wright active, so I think they might not know exactly. Kind of see what happens a little bit. Whoever plays well is going to stay out there. And Sims is still the alpha of the offense. So, if Nakua is going to be chalk, even though he's a good price, I'm definitely going to be under.
Yeah, and I think you can argue for being under just because this passing offense is not very good. I mean, I think we only have them projected for 180 or so passing yards, just not particularly compelling. We know this is a team that wants to lean on their ground game. Nakua's ownership is going to be really interesting. Right now we have him for 30%, not fully accounting for, the new depth chart that we got this morning. So we're going to see where the industry falls on Nakua after, knowing that Devin Ross is a starter. But I think, one of the main arguments for Nakua is that you look sub 5K, there's really nobody. I mean, it's him, Chris Rowland. Just not a ton of other tempting options. I'm always a sucker for Benjamin Victor, and he never gets me more than 4 DraftKings points. It's really tough sub 5K, and I think that could push Samson Nakua's ownership up significantly, even if he only projects as more of a mediocre value relative to a lot of these other receivers. Neil, I'm curious what you think. I imagine this quarterback spot is a stay away for you, but any love for any of these Michigan pass catchers?
Yeah, I really, really hate this situation because you'd want to play the quarterback here against Memphis. This is a team that's giving up over the past 3 weeks, 395 yards per game. They're kind of lapping the field in terms of being bad and giving up a ton of yards per game, and 284 through the air, 284 yards given up through the air over the past 3 weeks. In the UFL, that is a ton. Let's see, the second most over that span, Michigan's given up 219 yards per game through the air. Nobody else over 200. So 284, they're giving up so many yards. So I really want to lean into the passing game, but then it's really tough with how, the split at quarterback here. There's a part of me that's do we want to just make an assumption, that Lewerke is going to play himself off the field? Remember when we got Adrian Martinez at 0% ownership. So part of me is maybe I want to take a shot on Perkins just in case we get that scenario of he ends up playing a lot more, because they seemed frustrated with Lewerke last week, seemed to kind of play himself off the field. So maybe if he throws an early interception, that could happen. Then you get Bryce Perkins, who can run a lot. He could be kind of a nuke code there. Probably a stay away. That's kind of a galaxy brain. If you are 150 maxing, maybe give it a couple shots on Bryce Perkins. I don't know that I'm going to get there, but there is a small part of me that's maybe we could give it a shot, and he can kind of break this slate at 8,600, very little ownership. Probably, though, you're right. I think it is basically a stay away in terms of the quarterbacks. But because the Memphis defense is so bad through the air, I'm still going to be taking shots on these receivers without the quarterback, particularly Marcus Sims. Just he's been out there, 86% route share last week. Nakua is, I hate how chalky he is. If he were not chalky, then I would probably be taking a lot of shots there. But since he is chalky, it's a little bit less fun. So yeah, definitely Sims for me. Outside of Sims, probably some Nakua. Maybe I'll take, I don't know if I'll even play any Quinn. Maybe I'll play some Trey Quinn just because how bad the defense is. Maybe they'll get a lot done through the air. Cole Hikatini, I think, is fine at 3,300 at 6% ownership. I want to be taking shots on this team because the defense is so bad against the pass, but it really is kind of a tough spot to do so, or hard to like kind of figure out what you want to play here. For me, it's probably just Sims and Nakua, but I'm probably going to be, if Nakua is really going to be 31% owned, I'll probably be underweight to Nakua.
Yeah, I think we'll end up bumping Nakua down a bit, but I would be shocked if he ended up getting anywhere below 20. I would imagine he'll end up maybe 20 to 25% will probably be what our final number is on Nakua, because like I said, I mean, it's really tough to build lineups when you need a salary saving wide receiver. And he's going to end up popping in optimizers as that top option. For what it's worth, I think I'm done with Trey Quinn. He's, the upside on these slot receivers in these low volume passing offenses is just terrible. I mean, he's not running deep routes. Chances of a deep touchdown isn't good. I think he really needs a 2 touchdown performance to get you there, because he's not going to get there on receiving volume. Won't be able to get there on a single play, most likely. Hikatini, I think, is interesting because he sort of has the slot role that I wish Trey Quinn has, where he's running significantly deeper routes, and he actually is getting some deep targets, and he's cheaper. He's only 3,300. So if I was going to take a shot on a non-Nakua, non-Marcus Sims Michigan wide receiver, I think it would be Cole Hikatini. Furby, do you have any love for these ancillary Michigan guys after Nakua and Sims?
I always want Quinn to be a thing, and
yeah.
I feel like he has like big playability, and he's shown it in the past, but certainly not this year. And with the pass volume, I think it's pretty thin. And as far as like Hikatini, he's not a guy that you look at as like, oh yeah, he's going to break a slate for me. But we've seen, with you don't have to be perfect in these contests. And, if you can get 4 points, 5 points from a $3,300, $3,500 tight end, sometimes that's enough. You look at your winning lineup and you just kind of, rush past it. It's like, oh, I had Hikatini, whatever, or I had Ellis or something like that. One of the really low price guys. But if that gets you, 2 of the elite receivers, it's something to mix in.
Yeah, I think that's the best argument for these. We'll talk about Alex Ellis a little bit later, but these like complete punts at the wide receiver tight end position is that they're going to enable you to get up to builds that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Because I think most people are going to say, oh, Chris Rowland or Nakua, that's the cheapest guy I'll play. And then you'll end up on a more balanced team. Whereas you could play both, Kirkland and Hakeem Butler. I'm not sure that's something I'm going to do this week, but just as an example, if you roster a guy like Cole Hikatini. So I think that's interesting. And then moving on to the backfield here, it's really easy to love both of these guys' plays. Matthew Colburn saw really strong usage last week, looked fantastic, ended up with 141 yards from scrimmage. His workload was only worth about 11.9 fantasy points according to weighted opportunity, but still ended up seeing right around identical usage to Wes Hills, who is at 12.2. Snaps were split pretty much evenly. For what it's worth, I did have a stat pull in my article this week that in their last 4 wins, Wes Hills, his workload, according to weighted opportunity, has been worth about 14.5 DraftKings points, while Matthew Colburn's has been worth about 10.5. So Hills has, as I've noted previously, generally seen better usage in positive game scripts. He's got a fantastic matchup against this Michigan defense. And they're an 8.5-point favorite. So I think you can make a great argument for Hills. You could also make a great argument for Colburn because he's looked fantastic. I mean, he was just ripping off long runs left and right last week, and he's playing a rushing defense this week that is, roughly equally as bad. So, Neil, I'll throw it over to you here. What are your thoughts on this backfield, because for me, I think I prefer Wes Hills outright, given, game script considerations. And then also just looking at our projected ownership, it looks like we have him around 6-7% with Colburn closer to 20.
Yeah, and you don't get them at like the big price disparity anymore. It used to be kind of a big separation. Wes Hill's the expensive guy. Colburn was relatively cheap. Now Colburn up to 7,500. Wes Hill's at 8,600. I think I'm with you. I think I prefer Hills largely because of the ownership, but also just the prices being closer here. I think that you're right. The game script kind of favors Wes Hills here. They're probably just going to be pounding the rock once they get a lead, or at least that's the story we can tell ourselves when he's coming in at 7% ownership. And both, are somewhat involved in the rush game. I think of Colburn as being more of the the more of the receiving back, but Wes Hill's also running, a decent number of routes out there, if nothing else. So I'm certainly going to be overweight to what the field has for Wes Hills as far as Colburn, and I'm trying to look at what we have for the update. So we have Colburn now at 21% ownership. I'm probably still going to be right there I'm probably going to be with the field on Colburn, over the field for sure, though, on Wes Hills at 7%.
Yeah, this is pretty thin, but I do think you can actually justify playing both of these guys on the same team, especially if it ends up just being a massive blowout this week.
I don't think it's that thin, to be honest.
Oh, okay, great. That's good to know. Furby, any thoughts on this backfield? Do you have a clear preference between these two, or is it more of just sort of mixing them in as much as possible?
No, I'm going to mix them in. I definitely like the ownership disparity for Hills, but I'm going to have quite a bit of both. I don't know if both on the same team. I guess it's I'll trust the Sims on that one. If it gives me both, I'll leave it there, but I'm not going to try to force that. Especially since it's the first game, that I might not be trying to get unique there, but I definitely also see what percentage of running backs, how heavy on running backs in general I'll be. But I imagine I'll be about at the field on Colburn, and definitely I'll be above on Hills.
Yeah, I think we may end up bumping Hills up a little bit. I do feel like a good amount of people may see the projected ownership and say, oh, if I have to decide between the two, I'll just go with Hills. It seems like a good spot for him. But I can pretty safely say that Colburn's going to be higher owned. He's just a better value. Any sort of optimizer is going to push you toward a little more Colburn than Hills. So I would expect Colburn to be higher owned, but I wouldn't be shocked if our final ownership projection for Hills was closer to maybe 12, 13, 14% come Saturday morning. All right, moving on here to our second game on Saturday. It's a rematch from week 5. It's the Houston Roughnecks at the Birmingham Stallions. Houston is a 16.5-point underdog here. The total is 43. This game kicks off at 8 p.m. on Saturday. I think the total's about right. I guess you could argue for some value on the Houston side, but you would literally have to pay me to bet on the Roughnecks in this game. I don't think I can do it. I could see them losing by 30. It's Birmingham's just that good. Furby, any thoughts on this betting line here?
I guess it's just such a big line. I guess if you think it's a low scoring game, you might want to find one of the sites that you can parlay it that take the under and the Houston points. Just because, if they keep it that close, if it's a blowout, it's probably going to be over. So, if it's under, you might try to parlay those, but it's probably more of a live betting. Like most of the games, I've been doing a lot better on the live betting than before the game.
Yeah, I think there can be some pretty significant edges live betting. So I definitely like that. Neil, any thoughts on this absolutely massive spread or the total?
Yeah, I would probably take Houston with the points there if I were going to bet anything, but it's going to be a mess. I'm probably not making any bets on this one. I can't, so I'm definitely not, but I probably wouldn't even if I could. And I'm jealous of all these. I've never done an in-game bet, but that sounds really fascinating. That's probably the way to go though, if that's what Furby's doing.
Yeah, we've talked about it a bit with Justin Freeman and I believe Johnny Proctor when he was on the show, how pretty much every betting site is using their NFL or their college football algorithms to sort of calculate these live betting lines. So you can get some value on underdogs that are trying to make a comeback where, an 18-point comeback in the NFL with 2 minutes left is obviously just basically impossible. But in the UFL, you could certainly tie it up and force the game into overtime. So the odds would be a little better there. And then also, I mean, you can, like Furby has noted kind of throughout the show, you can sort of just judge the way the game's going a little bit and see if it's, is this going about how I anticipated, or is, such and such team really making a point of stopping the run and forcing, a team like Michigan or Houston or whatever to pass. And I think there can be some pretty good edges with that. Or, I mean, if there's ever a big quarterback injury, live betting, there's no chance any book is adjusting their live lines based on an in-game quarterback injury. That's just for us degenerates who watch the game. So certainly some interesting edges there with live betting. Injuries. Houston side, Jarrett Guarantano is the emergency QB3 due to a wrist injury he suffered last week. So Reed Sinnett is going to be your starter. Houston's also missing star linebacker Reuben Foster for this game. On the Birmingham side, CJ Maribel is a healthy scratch. Larry Roundtree is listed as the RB2, and Ricky Person is your starter. I'm not sure if Person is being benched or if this is more of just a nod to Roundtree, who Holtz has spoken highly of, but has basically said, like, look, this is a guy who can't see the field because Maribel and Person are just really good. So it may be, a bit of a, hey, we've got playoff positioning locked up. They also sat Marcus Gilbert. I'm not sure if he's dealing with an injury, but I wouldn't be shocked if Birmingham mixed in some veteran rest over the next few weeks as they prepare for the playoffs. Either way, Larry Roundtree is going to be your backup running back for the Stallions. On the Houston side, I have, generally speaking, I've always been pretty high on Justin Hall and Kiki Chisholm. They're projecting as okay values for us. I mean, the big thing with Justin Hall is that it doesn't matter what we project his ownership for. He's always going to come in around half that. So that's sort of the thing that I'm interested in with Justin Hall is like, look, we have him right now around 15%. I wouldn't be shocked if that was somehow 7 or 8, despite the fact that, you use pretty much any projection source, put it into an optimizer, you're going to end up with a little more Justin Hall than that. So Neil, I'll throw it over to you. Do you have any love for, Justin Hall, assuming his ownership comes in even lower than what we have projected? I've already lowered it for what it's worth from, the original number. I might have to do that again. And then, maybe more broad thoughts on this Houston passing attack.
Yeah, Justin Hall, certainly somebody that I will consider. If you told me that he's coming in, I mean, that's kind of a big difference. And I got to look at the updated. I keep forgetting that we just updated the ownership. So we have Justin Hall now at 14.7. Okay, at 14.7%, I am fairly interested in Justin Hall. I think that's a reasonable number. I don't think I'm taking any huge stand on Justin Hall there. Does lead the team in route participation over the past 2 weeks, but he's 8,000, and this is a really, really tough spot against this Birmingham Stallions defense. So I'm probably not going far different from the field on Justin Hall. I think it's about right. Like they probably are going to need to be, we see this enormous spread. They're probably going to be needing to throw the ball quite a lot. So maybe he just gets there on like PPR volume. But I don't think they're going to be putting up a lot of points on the Stallions. I think 15% feels about right for Justin Hall. I think that's probably about where I'm going to be. Kiki Chisholm, I think, is also, I mean, it's easier for Kiki Chisholm to get there on PPR volume just because he's only 5,700. So that is pretty enticing for me in a game where they should be playing from behind, throwing the ball quite a lot. So I would say, yeah, those two in play for me, probably nobody else for Houston.
Yeah, one good note with Justin Hall is that when trailing by 8 or more points, Houston's pass rate is 78%. We basically expect them to trail by 8 or more points for this entire game. So I think you could use that to justify Hall or Chisholm. Beyond those two, it is just really tough when we have, essentially 3 players splitting this wide receiver 3 role. Furby, I'm curious what you think about Reed Sinnett, Justin Hall, Chisholm, the rest of these Houston wide receivers.
Sinnett's kind of in the same boat as Cookus.
Yeah.
Where I don't really want to play him, but there's not a lot of quarterbacks that look like they're going to play the whole game. But I'm pretty high on Hall. He's done a lot better with Sinnett. Sinnett actually leads the league in short pass yard accuracy. And Hall is dominating short targets on Houston. So he's done a lot, whenever Sinnett gets in there, he's just peppering Hall with targets. So I'm going to be pretty high on him, especially if it's coming in at 14%. I always see him high and I'm like, I don't know. He's not that great a play at high ownership. And then I'm like, oh, why didn't I have more Hall? Although it hasn't really burned you yet. And maybe it won't burn you this game too, but I'm definitely going to be high on him. And Garantano has been really poor at short passes accuracy. He's one of the last in the league at 64%, which is pretty poor for, when you're 0 to 9 yards away. Even last game, Sinet came in. Hall had 4 targets throughout the game. Sinet threw 2 passes, and like the first one's right to Hall, for like 7 yards. So I'm definitely pretty high on Hall.
Yeah.
As far as the other guys, I'll have a little bit of Chisholm for the savings, and I don't think anything else.
Yeah, pretty easy to ignore the rest of these guys after Hall and Chisholm. I really like that note on Hall's, sort of short passing prowess, especially with Sinet. I mean, you watch Quarantano play, and it's easy to see how this guy was, a highly rated high school recruit. He's a good athlete and he has a rocket arm, but he cannot turn down the arm strength for these short passes. I mean, he is firing these like 5-yard throws in there, and they're not particularly accurate either. So that certainly makes it tough for these Houston wide receivers. But thankfully we have, Sinet starting. So I do like Hall. I just wonder if this is going to be the 5th week in a row where we have him projected, for an amount of ownership, and it ends up coming in at half that. That's just been happening over and over and over again. Maybe eventually the field will start liking Justin Hall too. And, the other argument for Justin Hall is that he's just really good. I think, if he was on St. Louis, you'd be talking about him like we talk about Hakeem Butler and Ja'Cour Pearson. It's just a shame he's trapped in such a poor passing offense. Okay, these running backs, I mean, man, I don't know if I'm ready to lose any more money on Mark Thompson. I just don't know if it's ever going to be there for him, especially in a game like this where Birmingham's a great rushing defense and they're favored by 16.5 points. I mean, this just screams stay away from Mark Thompson. TJ Pledger, I guess you could make an argument for. Maybe he gets there on a little bit of passing volume, but, I still worry that Thompson would steal, some carries inside the 10. This is pretty tough. Furby, I'm curious what you think about this Houston backfield.
I'm probably not going to have either. It's like a mess. They're just not going to have a lot of plays against Birmingham. So, and they're going to probably be behind, and I keep betting on, at least wanting to play some Thompson, thinking there's going to be a blow up game. And he's had some decent runs, little glimpses, but I mean, he's going to be unowned. So I guess a little, if he does nuke this late and have 3 touchdowns, no one's going to own him. So you're not going to be buried anyway. So, which, pretty unlikely anyway. So I don't think I'm going to have either one.
Yeah, I think ownership is really the best argument you can make to play Mark Thompson. And I mean, there's always that glimmer of hope that maybe this is the week he goes back to his 2023 workload where he's seeing, 75% of snaps and is getting basically every backfield touch and is running a ton of routes. It's hard to get behind when TJ Pledger is still listed as the starter. We're still seeing Pledger steal a good amount of work. Pledger ended up with 42% of backfield weighted opportunity last week. I don't really see that going away. Neil, do you want to lose any more money on Mark Thompson this week?
I think I'm done. Losing money on Mark Thompson finally. Mostly because of the matchup. I mean, if it were a better matchup, I'd still be willing to lose more money there. But in this matchup, Birmingham over the past 3 weeks, 53 rushing yards allowed per game. Like, that is just insane how good they are against the run. So I'm not going to take. I was thinking like I kind of want to galaxy brain my way into Pledger, but even Pledger, like you look at his route participation has not been that great over the past couple weeks. His targets over the past 2 weeks, TJ Pledger is looking at 3 total targets. So I think of him as being more of the passing down back, but even there, he has not been very good. So really hard to make a case for either of them. I mean, you said it, Jake. Like the only case you can really make for them is really low ownership, both coming in projected under 1% ownership. That's sort of interesting. You put up a 30-point game for Mark Thompson, then you're way ahead of the field. But I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna waste any more money here.
Well, I mean, there is another good argument for Mark Thompson, and it's that all of us are done with him. So that obviously means he's about to score 30 DraftKings points in the biggest upset of the season. Yeah, it is. It is pretty thin. I think I'll still toss out a Mark Thompson lineup or two just because it makes me feel good. The tradition of losing money on this guy, I don't think I can get away from it quite yet. Especially, with everyone else wanting to be done with him, I just feel like I need a little bit of Thompson in my life.
By the way, Jake, I mean, you always say that he is the Derrick Henry of spring football. If that is true, Derrick Henry always goes off when nobody plays him. He gets those 3 touchdown games at 0 ownership all the time. So, maybe there's one more reason to play him if he really is the Derrick Henry of spring football.
This is why we listen to the UFL breakdown, guys, is because we have all this high end analysis here.
Great analysis there.
Yes, this is really good stuff. All right, moving on to the Birmingham side of this game. I mean, man, hard not to love Adrian Martinez. Hard not to want to play a ton of Adrian Martinez. We have him projected for over 40% ownership right now. I wouldn't be shocked if in like single entry, high stakes stuff, he got up to 75% ownership. I mean, it could really get out of hand here. As always, it's pretty difficult to know who to pair him with, especially with Amari Rogers back in the lineup. I don't necessarily think Marlon Williams is a good play anymore, especially at 7,100. I suppose the guy I would be the most tempted by would be Deon Kane, but Furby, I'm curious on your thoughts. Adrian Martinez, how do you view him overall? And then how do you want to stack him, given that, things are pretty flat among these Birmingham wide receivers?
I'd be a little more likely to, really increase my Martinez exposure. I'll probably be around that 40% because, I mean, he's clearly, if he's playing, like the best fantasy quarterback right now. But Skip seems very committed to this notion that it's a 2-quarterback system, even though Martinez has been a lot better. So I'm just, every week I'm a little bit worried, maybe they get up by 21 here and he can fulfill his 2-quarterback system, rest Martinez a little bit for the playoffs. And we only get a half out of Martinez, which might still be enough, but I'm a little bit nervous. So I'll have a lot of Martinez, certainly the most exposure of any quarterback. But it worries me a little bit that at any minute it could be the rug pull we've kind of been waiting for.
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. I did consider that this week. Maybe you could argue, should we give a Corral projection? I'm not exactly sure. To me, I think Birmingham wants to keep. They've clearly settled on Martinez being the guy, and while I know that they love Corral, I think for this game, they are still playing. They have playoff positioning locked up. They're going to be in the playoffs, but they are still playing for home field advantage. If they drop the next 3 games and Michigan won the next 3 games, they would lose home field advantage to Michigan and have to play that game in Detroit. So that's why I think this ends up being a full game for Martinez. But, as Furby said, they could get up huge. And in that scenario, third, fourth quarter, they might just say, let's let Corral do it. And we know they trust Corral. So that is certainly a risk, especially when ownership is this massive. Neil, any thoughts on that? And then maybe some of these Birmingham wide receivers?
I agree. It is definitely a legitimate concern. I also will note that Michigan plays before them. So we will know if Michigan has won that game before this game starts. So maybe if Michigan wins, maybe you play a little bit more Adrian Martinez. If Michigan loses, they don't really have as much incentive to play Adrian Martinez the whole game. So if Michigan loses, then we can, lay off the Martinez a little bit, I think. I said, that I go back and forth on, like, do I just play the cheat code quarterback every week? I think that this week I'm still going to be probably like slightly light on Martinez if he comes in at 43%, partially because of those concerns, because he's 1,100. As Furby said, he could still get there in a half, but he's at this price tag, probably unlikely to get there in a half. So I'll be a little bit light on Martinez, still going to play a good amount. I do still think he's just like the clear class of his own at quarterback position. But because of the price tag, the slight concerns that he might not play the entire game, I probably will be a little bit light on Martinez. And like I said, if Michigan does lose this game somehow, then probably I'll go even lighter on Martinez because they have less incentive to play him the full game.
Yeah, I think that's a really sharp take from Neil. If Michigan were to lose this game, backing off Martinez exposure a bit, I think makes some sense. I still think they'd probably ride with Martinez for most of the game because that's sort of what they practiced all week. But I would consider that, the rug pull, Corral coming in for even just a half would be a lot more likely if Michigan did lose to Memphis in that first game. Adrian Martinez, just for context, guys, he's averaging 33.3 DraftKings fantasy points per start. That's 13% better than 2019 Lamar Jackson, who's the greatest fantasy quarterback of all time. I looked through some historic DraftKings pricing. Josh Allen is the most expensive quarterback of the last 5 years. He cost $8,600 in week 10 of 2022. That was 17% of your total DraftKings salary. Adrian Martinez is only 22% of your total DraftKings salary, and he's 23% more productive than Josh Allen was in 2022. I mean, just absolutely absurd production for Martinez. And another Martinez note, and I put this in my article, was that the last time these teams played, Houston ran a ton of man coverage. And when you run man coverage, defenders' backs are turned to the quarterback. That opens up huge rushing lanes. And we saw Martinez gash him for 138 rushing yards. Skip Holtz noted that in the post-game press conference. He was like, yeah, I couldn't believe they were seeding these QB runs. There's also a point, I think in the mid-third quarter of that Week 5 game, where, the cameras zoom in on Matt Corral, Martinez, Holtz talking, and Holtz mentions that they keep running man. And then Matt Corral just goes, that is so stupid. And, what did we see? Martinez just scores a ton of fantasy points. So generally, I don't believe in reading into previous matchups too much because, coaches grind the film, they make adjustments, but this Houston coaching staff has just been so bad that I wouldn't be shocked if they ran the same exact game plan out and just got massacred on the ground again by Adrian Martinez. In terms of who we pair Adrian Martinez with, that's pretty tough. Just looking through our projections, Deion Kane certainly sticks out here. I really don't have much love for, Kevin Austin, Benjamin Victor, Amari Rogers, any of these ancillary guys. I think I'll mostly be sticking with Kane and Sternberger this week. Furby, I'm curious on your thoughts. Is there anyone here that, is sort of an ancillary cheaper option that you're tempted by, or are you just going with the bigger names?
The bigger names. I've tried to get Victor a few times, and I haven't got him right. But it'd probably be mostly Kane and a little bit of Sternberger. They just have not thrown to him this year, which is hard to believe after, how dominating he was last year. And he has less than a 15% target per route run this year on a team that's not looking to pass that much. So, and with Mari Rogers back, it's been Mari Rogers and Marlon Williams just taking all of just 50-50 pretty much every week. It might go 60-40, but, they split in the slot every week. So if we have both of them, which we do, Williams is the only one of those two I would consider just because he has 4 touchdowns. He led the team in touchdowns 2 years ago. Certainly a better playmaker, more likely to get the touchdowns, big plays. So out of those two, I'll have a little bit of Marlon, but not a lot. And then probably have the most Kane. Probably about with the field maybe. What do you guys have him projected for?
Dion?
Yeah, ownership.
Oh, we've got him right now for 22%. That's generally where he's been falling most weeks, is around that 20% mark. I think people are coming around a little more to just letting, Martinez lineups play the top projected plays and not necessarily forcing in a wide receiver along with it. I think if we had AJ McCarron projected for 45% ownership, then, Hakeem Butler would come in around, 35-40% as well. But yeah, I think I'm pretty close to you on that. I have a really hard time clicking Marlon Williams. I do think he's a great player. He's popping in a lot of the efficiency stats, which does tempt me. But in these games where Amari Rogers plays, like Furby said, it's generally been a pretty even split in the slot. So that does trip me up a little bit. And Amari Rogers is significantly cheaper. I don't think he's a guy I'm going to get to, but Marlon's just a tougher click at 7,100 than he had been the last few weeks when he was, mid 5, low 6s. Neil, what about you? Any love for these Birmingham pass catchers?
Yeah, that's a really, really good note on Amari Rogers coming back this week, because I'm tempted looking at Marlon Williams, last week, 76% route participation, 5 targets. But you're right. Probably Amari Rogers is going to eat into that a little bit, which makes it a little bit tougher. At 3% ownership, I'm tempted a little bit by Marlon Williams, but that's, again, probably only if you're playing, 20 plus lineups, you start considering Marlon Williams. Other than that, yeah, Deion Kane pretty clearly my favorite wide receiver from this group, 84% route share last week. Jay Sternberger right there as well, 6,200. The price makes it, a decent enough play. So I will be playing probably, my guess is that I'll be overweight to the field on Jay Sternberger. I might be underweight to the field on Deion Kane. I guess I have a couple questions for you guys. And I guess the first one just for Furby. I'm curious your thoughts on playing Adrian Martinez naked, because we've had this conversation multiple times, and I go back and forth on, in a field this size, maybe I should be considering playing him naked. And we've seen it work out. A couple weeks ago, it worked out in the sense that the receivers that I paired with him did absolutely nothing while he went off. How do you feel about playing Adrian Martinez naked?
I still think I'm going to at least single stack him. Probably only single, maybe a few doubles. But
Okay.
he's still. It's not like he's just running. I mean, he's been
Yeah.
throwing a lot. They haven't had a ton of passing touchdowns, but I mean, he's getting 250 yards a game. So it had a couple big passing games, especially more recently. And so I think, I mean, certainly the Sims are going to want to put at least two, and they always want to put in the cheap guys. Uh, Sometimes
Yeah.
I sub them out, sometimes I'll leave them in, but I'll probably have him stacked with at least one receiver
Okay.
or Sternberger for most of the lineups.
That's my instinct also. My second question is, do we have the same concerns with these receivers being benched? Like we were talking about Adrian Martinez potentially being benched for Corral. Could we see Deion Kane bench some of these backup receivers coming in? Jake, what do you think?
Maybe that's a good question. Again, I think that's a significantly bigger risk if Michigan loses. That
Yeah.
would be my worry, is that maybe they get away from Sternberger, maybe they get away from Kane a little bit. That said, I mean, I I don't think they view these, and maybe this is an incorrect way to think about it, but I don't think they view these wide receivers as being nearly as important to team success as a guy like
Yeah.
Martinez. So he would have the greatest benching risk. But yeah, Furby, I'm really curious what you think here.
I'm not too worried about benching on them. It's mostly that, yeah, they're not as valuable as Martinez, and Holtz has really flag planted the idea of that it's a two quarterback system. He said before, people tell me I can't do it, and it's working,
Yeah.
and it won't work, but it is. So he's really attached to that idea. So, um, I I think they're probably more concerned with a perfect season going 10-0 more than Michigan right now. I mean, I think they think they're the best. I don't think they're too worried about Michigan. So I think win or loss in Michigan, they're going to be going all out. It's more of if it's a blowout, if we want to rest some guys, which I'm not that concerned with the receivers.
Yeah, I think you could also make an argument that they might want to keep Martinez in just to secure him the MVP, because really the only argument against Martinez being league MVP is that he hasn't played enough. If we get to the end of the season and he's at 5.5 games and every other quarterback has 9 or 10, it might be a little tricky to vote him for MVP. So I'm not sure if that's something they're thinking about significantly, but definitely worth considering for DFS purposes. This backfield here, Ricky Person is going to be the lead back. He actually had his second best workload of the season the last time he was listed as the RB1. And then Larry Roundtree looks like a pretty solid value to us at around 5K. I mean, I think you could argue this is just going to be the Ricky Person show, but at least the last time Roundtree came in, it was actually against Houston in this exact same game. According to Weighted Opportunity, his workload was worth 9.9 fantasy points. So that's a pretty good workload for a guy who's just 5K. Again, we expect him to play the secondary role, but to me, he's basically Maribel minus a couple carries. Furby, how are you sort of projecting this backfield, and any love for either running back?
Yeah, definitely have a lot of person. And I know you've said before, Neil, about talking about looking at raw numbers and not just market share. This is one where it's like, we saw Maribel miss a couple of weeks ago, and Person got quite a bit more, but Roundtree still had 9 attempts for 50 yards and a touchdown. So, I mean, he's definitely still in play. It's a little thin, but I mean, he's 5K, so I'm definitely going to have some exposure there. And they just run so much, and good chance they're going to be running a lot more this game. So I'll have a lot of Person and some Roundtree, just because these backfields, nobody's safe. They could switch it up. Plus, I mean, there's just a lot of rushing to go around on this team.
Yeah, absolutely. Neil, what are your thoughts on this backfield?
Yeah, I think that is well said. I know, Jake. Ricky Person is, I think, your favorite running back in the league. Is that an accurate statement?
Oh yeah. I'm a big Ricky Person fan. His mom and his brother follow me on Twitter. That's how big of a Ricky Person. Oh yeah, that's how big that. Like, I've been tweeting a lot about how good Ricky Person is, and the Person family's getting behind me.
That is awesome. And yeah, he has clearly shown that talent, coming in at just 5% ownership. Maybe they do kind of lay on the run a little bit more in this game now that they're, locking things up. Maybe they just kind of go more on the ground and just, I mean, I guess I should look at, sorry, I keep on going back to what I have for the ownership, and I forget that we have updated it. We have Ricky Person now at, where is this?
21%.
Oh, 21. Okay, so that is a little bit. It's a lot more ownership than what I had listed. At 21%, probably still playing him, but I'm probably not going well over the field there. And Larry Roundtree at 5,000, that is just too cheap. I do think that he's a former NFL back. I'll believe in the talent at 5,000. Gets enough opportunities there, so I'll take some shots on Larry Roundtree. Also, what do we have the ownership at there, Jake, if you have it?
We have 8%. I wonder if that's a little high. I'll need to investigate a little bit more, kind of where the industry's at. I wouldn't be shocked if it came in lower, but I don't think there's any way it's getting to double digits or anything like that.
And that is so last week we had the whole running back conversation, and I was like completely out on Devion Smith. I ended up playing a few shares because as I was making my lineups, I realized there were like 0 cheap running backs that you wanted to play last week. It's gotten a lot tougher than it was early in the year. You could every week find like a few running backs who were 5,000 to 6,000 who were very viable. Last week it was like, I guess I'll play Devion Smith because there were no other running backs who were viable in this price range. So now that a $5,000 viable running back to me is very appealing here. So yeah, I'll probably be overweight to 8% on Larry Roundtree.
Yeah, I think I will as well. I guess I worry a tad that his projected passing role may not be quite as good as Maribel. He kind of feels like Maribel light. Like if Maribel was, imagine 90% of CJ Maribel at 75% of the price. That feels pretty good to me as a play. Not someone I want to play a ton of, but I may end up around 15 or 20% because, like we talked about with like a guy like Cole Hicatini, playing a really cheap running back does sort of enable builds that a lot of the field won't get to. With a more balanced approach. All right, before we move on to this next game, we did have a comment that DraftKings added Devin Ross to the player pool. He's 5,500, so to me that I just don't really think he's in play. I mean, he's cheap enough that you could take some shots. Before we move on here, do either of you guys have thoughts on Devin Ross at 5,500?
No, probably not. If it was the last game, and I could swap onto him,
right?
Yeah.
There's a good chance you're taking a 2 or 3 from him.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of how I'm viewing it as well. All right, we can move on to our first game on Sunday. This game kicks off Sunday at noon Eastern. It's the DC Defenders at the St. Louis Battlehawks. DC is an 8-point underdog. Total here is 44.5. I like the over here. I think the spread is just about right. That said, I actually did, well, it's right if we assume AJ McCarron plays, which is easily the biggest piece of news that we are faced with this week. So let me cover injuries and then we can talk about this game line. DC side is clean. Jordan Teamu is dealing with a concussion, but he is expected to play. Reggie Barlow keeps saying that he's fine. Reggie Barlow also said that he would have gone back into the game if it wasn't for the rule that once your QB3 is active, your starter cannot rejoin the game. So I was a little confused by that language. I mean, if he has a concussion, why would he come back in? I don't know, but I would say it's quite likely Teamu plays this week. And on the St. Louis side, AJ McCarron is dealing with an ankle sprain. He logged a limited session on Wednesday, but did not practice yesterday. The team also signed quarterback Drew Plitt. So to me, there's probably a 90% chance that AJ McCarron misses this game. If McCarron sits, Manny Wilkins would likely start, but I also think we could see Brandon Silvers rotate in as well. Okay, back to the betting line. I did grab DC +9 on an offshore because, like I said, I do think it's likely McCarron misses. Of course, if we assume McCarron plays, this line does seem about right. So, Furby, I'll throw it over to you. Thoughts on the line as it stands right now, and then thoughts on the line if McCarron's ruled out.
Yeah, I think I would take DC at the moment. And I don't really have a big take on the total, but yeah, I don't think it'll make a huge difference. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It'll make a big difference, but if McCarron's ruled out, what do you think? That's probably a 4-point difference, but
yeah, 4 seems about right.
It's quite a bit, so I think I'm going to stay away right now.
Yeah, and my lean on the over with the total was, again, with McCarron playing. I think total's fine if McCarron sets. I would lean towards DC on the spread if McCarron sets. Neil, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're playing it right. I would take DC right now while you can. If you think it's likely that McCarron is going to sit, just take the line is off if McCarron is going to sit. So yeah, I think you take DC right now. I think that's a smart bet.
Yep, makes a ton of sense. Starting out with the DC side here, we know who the mega chalk player of the week is going to be. It's going to be Ty Scott. Kelvin Harmon has been ruled out for the year. He's on IR due to a hamstring injury that he suffered last week. And, we know the DC coaches finally came to their senses. They are now playing Ty Scott a ton. And I think he should slide right into that old Kelvin Harmon wide receiver one role at just 5,200. I mean, Ty Scott is by far the most efficient wide receiver in the league on a yards per route run basis. He's basically lapping the field. I mean, the sample size is a little small, but he's been very impressive. The tricky part for me, like always, is Jordan Teamu. We have him projected at 15% ownership. I think I'm going to come down on that number a decent bit. It doesn't really feel like people are itching to play Teamu. I always feel so neutral about Teamu. I kind of feel bad. I feel like I should have a good Teamu take, and I can never quite figure it out. Furby, I'll throw it over to you. Thoughts on Teamu, and then also thoughts on the Ty Scott chalk, because he is going to be, he could push for 50% ownership here.
Yeah, the Sims always want me to play more Teamu than I really feel comfortable. I think just because they're probably going to have to throw, and the receivers are cheap, especially this week. So I'm definitely going to have some. And Ty Scott, since it's a Sunday game, it makes for a pretty easy swap off of him if your lineup's not going the way you want. I'm definitely going to start with a good amount of Ty Scott, but he's definitely a receiver that could fail. I mean, even last week, he had 2 receptions. One was the long touchdown, and it was on that DC field, and you could, it was just a blown coverage. So if that hadn't happened, we're probably not going to have the chalk that we do this week, But I've been playing Scott all year, so I'm not going to get off him now without Harmon. And DC their roles have been pretty their wideouts have stayed out wide. They have not moved around. Like St. Louis has kind of moved guys around some to, get different guys involved. Brandon Smith has been out wide 88% of the time. Ty Scott 92. Vincent Smith. I think if you had to swap to someone, Vincent Smith would be an okay punt. They're all viable, but I think Scott's my favorite of those. And also Chris Rowland, they finally gave him a couple carries this week. He was very active in the running game with the Stars over the last 2 years, but that was his first 2 carries. So if that continues, that'd be a nice floor, a couple rushing attempts, maybe make some plays that way.
Yeah, I definitely think those are some sharp calls. I mean, with Ty Scott, like Furby said, I'm more willing to eat this Sunday chalk than the Saturday chalk because, you have pretty solid late swap flexibility with a guy like Ty Scott. And then Chris Rowland, 5 backfield snaps, 2 backfield carries. I mean, Darius Higgins and Cameron Harris have combined for 3.3 yards per carry. So it's pretty obvious that DC is looking for a little extra juice in this backfield. So I wouldn't be shocked if, I think it's fair to say Rowland and QD are going to split these slot snaps pretty evenly, but it'd be really, really nice at 4,400 if Rowland could get, half the slot roll and then maybe 25% of backfield production. That would be a very strong role at 4,400. Neil, I'll throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on Teamu and then some of these DC wide receivers?
So it's tough for me to really want to play much of Teamu. Just looking at team defenses for the year, St. Louis giving up the fewest passing yards per game on the year, and that's with a great offense. So teams are going to want to throw on them to try to keep up with the St. Louis offense, and they're still not able to throw on the St. Louis defense, giving up just 161 passing yards per game on the year. It's been even fewer. It's like 156 or something over the past few weeks. So it's really hard for me to want to play Teamu if he's getting any kind of steam. I get it because we have a lot of split quarterback rooms right now, so it's going to push up his ownership a little bit, but I think I'm out on Teamu. I'm going to be underweight to the field there. And Ty Scott, I understand why you want to play a lot of Ty Scott, but we've got him almost at 50% ownership. So for me, against this kind of defense, like there's certainly ways for Ty Scott to fail. Now he is cheap enough that I'm not going to be like full fading Ty Scott or anything like that. Like I agree, he is a great play here with Kelvin Harmon out. If he were coming in at lower ownership, I would be all in on Ty Scott. But just because we have him at nearly 50% ownership, it's really hard for me to want to play a lot of Ty Scott for a team that just generally doesn't have a ton of passing volume. They're not running 35 40 routes per game. They're always in the like under 25, like the route participation leaders on the team. So it's hard for me to really want to get overboard on Ty Scott, even though I agree, like I think that he's pretty talented. He's going to be probably the lead receiver there now with Kelvin Harmon out. I can see paths to failure here, and when you get a 50% owned player with like a pretty clear like tough matchup here with the St. Louis defense, I think that I'm lower on Ty Scott than you guys are. I'm ready for him to have that 100-yard and 2-touchdown game. That's certainly within his bag of tricks, but I'm just going to lose my money if that is the case. I'm going to be underweight to Ty Scott. I love the call on Roland, 4,400, easier for him to get there, obviously, even in a tough matchup, especially with those rushing opportunities that he gets as well. So I like that call. I may take some hero shots on like Kiki Cutie, just like assume that maybe, he was we thought he was the alpha coming into the year. We haven't really seen it. Maybe one of them, the role switches a little bit with Kelvin Harmon out, and we see a little bit more Kiki Cutie, and we've got him at 0% ownership. So there, if we're going to get like no ownership on Kiki Cutie, I actually might take a few shots there, but I think I'm going to be largely underweight to this passing offense. I think you're muted.
Got me.
Got you.
Yeah, it's about time. I've been pretty good on muting myself, but I'm no Scott Barrett. He talks on mute every single show. It's the lock of the century. But yeah, I think the argument against Ty Scott is, like Neil highlighted, the St. Louis passing defense is really, really strong. And, he's going to be 50% owned. So, I get that he's a great value. He's, pretty much no matter what projection set you use, he's going to pop as a really strong value this week. But, I could see myself getting away from it a little bit. I think I'll come in under his projected ownership, but probably not by a ton. Although I could certainly see myself, if all my teams are terrible, just swapping to basically no Ty Scott come Sunday morning. I'm okay. I don't think I'm going to touch Cutie at all. I just have a very hard, the price is still just a little high. If he was, closer to Roland's price, I would have some interest. I think, you could argue for either Brandon Smith or Vincent Smith as a complete punt. The problem is they're going to split, that secondary outside role, which for one, that secondary outside role has not been worth much in terms of overall volume. So that's pretty tough. And then, when the median is like close to a 50-50 split, they both had a route share in the mid 30s last week, if I remember correctly. So I don't think the coaches have a very strong lean between the two right now. That makes it a tough sell. But the upside argument there is that, look, maybe one of them has a great week of practice and we just don't know about it. And then all of a sudden Vincent Smith's out there for, a 90% route share at, 3,400. That would make him a pretty solid value. But, we've seen Vincent Smith out there for a 90% route share in individual games, and he just hasn't really done anything with it. So, that's pretty tough. In terms of the backfield, I mean, this feels total dust to me. I don't think I can get behind either running back here, Cameron Harris or Darius Higgins. Furby, what are your thoughts on the backfield before we move on to the St. Louis side?
Yeah, the backfield, the running backs had 4 attempts last week. So 3 by Harris, 1 by Higgins. And I was with you guys playing some Higgins, but it's pretty thin this week in this matchup. Maybe I swap onto him, but I don't think neither one looked like. I mean, I don't know what happened to this rushing attack year from last year to this year, but it's going to be hard to go there.
Yeah, you lose a few offensive linemen, you lose Abram Smith, and all of a sudden, and you lose a lot of positive game script, and all of a sudden, this backfield really falls off. Higgins has really faked us out a few times. There have been a couple different times this season where it's like, oh, is he going to be the guy where we can get, an 80% share backfield carries at really cheap? But no, it's never really materialized, unfortunately. And especially with Chris Rowling coming on in the backfield a little bit, I think it makes it really tough. And we know Teamu could steal those inside the 5 carries too. So it's difficult to even make an upside argument for either player in this backfield. Neil, any thoughts on Cameron or Darius Higgins before we move on?
Yeah, my guess is that I don't end up on either. I think the best case you can make for them is St. Louis is giving up 104 rushing yards per game over the past few weeks. I think on the season, wait, is that right? On the season, they're giving up, I guess, still 95 yards per game. So, they're not as good against the run as they are against the pass. So maybe they run a little bit more this week. But yeah, 4 total carries last week. Really, really hard to get there. It's probably just a stay away since we don't have. If it were a 20,000 person field, maybe I'd play it. But since there's only 2,000 total teams we're playing against, I don't think it's necessary.
Yep. With you on that. Okay, on the St. Louis side, this is basically going to have to be 2 different discussions. I think we can sort of fast forward through the what if AJ McCarron plays discussion, because again, I think that's more unlikely. I think probably 80 to 90% chance that he ends up sitting, given, he took a step back in practice, didn't practice yesterday, and they did sign Drew Plitt. So to me, if McCarron plays, Hakeem Butler, obviously a very, very strong play against a DC defense that he just absolutely maimed the last time these 2 teams matched up. I would wonder if maybe DC wants to pay him a little more attention, and then you could make an argument for a guy like Marcel Aitman, whose DNP last week cost me a ton of money. Neil, I know you were right there with me. He ended up being sick. So for those wondering what happened to Marcel Aitman, he was sick. I guess it was a last minute sort of sickness. Healthy enough to dress, healthy enough to stand in the sun for 3 straight hours in full pads, but not healthy enough to take a snap. So that was pretty disappointing, but we really don't expect a significant role change for Aitman. This week I'm still projecting him for right around an 80-90% route share. That said, it is a little concerning that Steven Mitchell has looked pretty solid as an outside wide receiver. I don't think Steven Mitchell's going away. You could certainly make an argument that, Mitchell's going to be a secondary guy to Aitman, but I do worry that the emergence of Mitchell here could move Aitman down the target earning pecking order. Furby, I'll throw it over to you. Quick thoughts on this St. Louis offense if McCarron ends up playing before we get to the hypothetical of if he doesn't.
One thing I've been doing a lot, at least been trying, whenever, assuming we have McCarron, is still double and triple stacking him, but leaving off McCarron just because he gets so cost prohibitive. And
Butler,
if you can find it. What's that? No, leaving off McCarron.
Oh, so like triple stacking 2 or 3 St. Louis.
Okay. Because he hasn't really separated as a quarterback. And, if you can get 18 points from, a cheaper quarterback, and McCarron gets 24, it's just so hard to triple St. Louis with McCarron, especially because you want Butler and, the other guys, but it hasn't worked out that great. And now it's less likely. I'm less likely to do that. Well, probably because he's not going to play, but also there used to be just 3 or 4 guys. Now we're getting, we're not real sure of the rotation. So, but I'll definitely have a lot of Wilkins if we get him started.
Yeah. So I do really like that call. I think stacking up the St. Louis wide receivers without McCarron is a pretty decent bet. I actually did that a lot last week. I'd play, Martinez with maybe 1 Birmingham guy plus, 2 or 3 St. Louis pass catchers.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a pretty decent build. Neil, I'll throw it over to you. Any quick thoughts on these St. Louis pass catchers if McCarron ends up playing?
Yeah, I've done the same thing that Furby's doing, where I do stack up these receivers pretty frequently without AJ McCarron. If AJ McCarron plays, probably the same thing. We'll go right back to it. Marcel Aitman, probably the sit game shouldn't affect my mindset that much, but it does scare me off a little bit. But again, he's coming in. We have him now under 1% ownership, so I will be losing money here again on Marcel Aitman. I've just been losing money on him all year. I'll continue making that bet because I still think that 2 games ago when he was active, they really were looking his way frequently. So even though the targets weren't there, they were looking his way, and then he was just being held every single time, including in the red zone. So if we assume that he has the same role that he had there, I think that the stats that everybody's seen are not fully indicative of his actual role in the offense. I think they like him better than his target share would show because of the penalties the last time out, and then of course not playing last game when he was sick. I'm probably not going to take as bullish a stance as I did last week when I had like 25% or something Marcel Aitman. I'm a little bit scared off that, like you said, Steven Mitchell might be a thing now. I don't think if there's any guarantee that he comes back to the role that he has had all year, but I'm still, if he's going to be under 1% owned, I'll probably have 10 to 15% Marcel Aitman. Definitely willing to continue making that bet on Aitman. Certainly going to be playing Hakeem Butler again, assuming that AJ McCarron's in there. He's just been so good. And then from there, I mean, Darius Shepard, 51 routes over the past 2 weeks, 66% route participation, certainly still in play. Ja'Cour Pearson, 75% route participation over the past 2 weeks. And then, yeah, Stephen Mitchell, I think is in play regardless at 4,500. So yeah, if AJ McCarron is in, I'm going to be playing many different parts of this passing game, and you know, with or without the quarterback.
Yeah, so I think that's great analysis, but unfortunately, that's analysis that largely applies to what I think is, you know, a 10 to 20% outcome, which is McCarron playing. Now we need to talk about what if McCarron sits. To me, if McCarron sits, I would expect, you know, I'm not. It's hard to assign probabilities to this, but I think there's maybe a 40 to 50% chance that Manny Wilkins gets a full game. And, you know, at 7K, that would make him just an incredible value. And then there's a chance that Wilkins and Brandon Silvers end up splitting, where they bring Wilkins in more for those rushing sort of RPO style looks and Silvers in more for obvious passing stuff. You know, that does make Wilkins a bit of a tougher pill to swallow. We'll have to pay attention to news a little bit, and all that. But to me, that would really knock down, you know, this entire passing game pretty significantly. I think that would leave Jacob Saylor's role relatively unchanged. I mean, you would have to knock him a bit for, you know, slightly worse offensive efficiency overall, but I still think they would end up feeding Jacob Saylor's. That said, you know, Hakeem Butler would go from being a really, really strong play, even at, you know, a price that's close to 11,000, to being just not that great when we would have legitimate concerns about passing volume. I mean, I think especially if this was a full game for Manny Wilkins, this offense could totally change. It could go from a, you know, basically an air raid attack to more of like the Birmingham style sort of college, tons of read options, tons of RPOs, maybe a little slower pace, all concerning for fantasy. So Furby, I'll throw it over to you. How would you guys look at projecting the St. Louis offense if we knew it was Manny Wilkins? And then what do you think of the possibility that Brandon Silvers could also rotate in?
Yeah, well, definitely. We currently have McCarron still in. We'll get that information soon. You know, I'm certainly by tonight we'll have that. And if it's Wilkins, I guess my hunch was Wilkins would play the whole game. Maybe I'd be thinking about that a little bit more, about Silvers rotating in more. But certainly we'll lower the rush or pass rate quite a bit. You know, give them a few less plays. So I'll probably have more sailors in that case, and have less exposure to the receivers. And I'll definitely still have some Aitman. It's the same bet as last week. I mean, the fact that he got sick, and now it's actually kind of the same bet, only, you know, lower ownership, because nobody's going to want to play him this week. So, but yeah, Stephen Mitchell does kind of scare me. You know, he 97% of the routes last week. So, you know, maybe they kind of like what they're seeing, and it's really going to be a mess with rotations. But yeah, I'll definitely have a lot less exposure all around if Wilkins is in. Also a little bit concerned too if McCarron starts, you know, and so I don't think I'm going to be having any McCarron even if he starts, just because I think I'll just go elsewhere, you know, and just worried that, you know, same thing. It's like, you know, gets 2-3 quarters and that's enough, you know, put in Wilkins for the last.
Yeah, certainly possible. For what it's worth, there was a tweet from someone who covers, you know, the St. Louis Battlehawks. They said that head coach Anthony Beck said during his media availability that AJ McCarron resumed throwing yesterday. He's not ruled out, but he also said it's all hands on deck. That's in quotations. If McCarron can't go, and then I believe they're doing some inferring here, but they say meaning both Manny Wilkins and Brandon Silvers could see snaps. You know, again, it's a really tricky spot where I could see a split, but, you know, Manny Wilkins getting a full game at 7K with how much he could run is too good to pass up, even if there is a chance at a split. Neil, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I came in with the same thought as Furby, that it's going to be the Manny Wilkins show, and I'm going to be really in on it if he is, you know, 7,000 starting in this offense would be a slam dunk for me with Manny Wilkins. Ran a lot in college. You make me a little bit scared about the play, Jake, but I'm still going to be in there. We'll see where the projected ownership comes in because we're projecting Manny Wilkins or AJ McCarron to be in. We haven't really run the projected ownership yet with AJ McCarron out. So if Manny Wilkins came in at like 30% ownership, at that point I would maybe try to fade it a little bit, hope that they do the 2 quarterback thing. If he comes in like sub 10%, like that is a really strong bet that I'm going to be all over, just hope that we get the right outcome where Manny Wilkins is good and they just leave him in there, which is certainly, like, if he's playing well, they're probably not going to bring Brandon Silvers in. So yeah, I'm going to be, I'll say that I don't think I'm going to be playing Brandon Silvers either way. I think that you nailed it, Jake, that we kind of have to wait on news. Like, we need to hear them say Manny Wilkins is the starter. If Brandon Silvers is starting, then I'm probably not playing it. I guess I take it back. If they name Brandon Silvers as starter and they don't say anything more about a rotation, maybe I'd consider playing him. But best case scenario is Manny Wilkins is the starter. We don't get anything more saying like we're going to play both quarterbacks. At that point, I would just make the bet on Manny Wilkins because 7,000 for a rushing quarterback in a great offense against a bad defense, that's just a great spot for Manny Wilkins.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Brandon Silvers is only 6K. So I guess, yeah, in that scenario, if he was somehow the starter and they didn't say anything more than that, you could argue for some shots on him. But to me, Silvers being listed as the starter and them not saying anything more than that just means he's going to take the first snap and then they're going to start rotating after that. I think the team really likes Manny Wilkins. I mean, there's a reason he's been the backup over Silvers. I mean, Silvers stylistically is more similar to McCarron. And generally, I think teams lean towards that sort of stylistic similarity when they are picking a backup because they just don't want that much to change if the starter gets hurt. But no, I think, St. Louis really likes Manny Wilkins. To sort of wrap this discussion up, stacking Wilkins, I think to me would pretty much just be limited to single stacks. I don't think St. Louis has great, affinity for his passing ability. So I do think that pass rate would come down. We would probably, knock all these guys down a bit in terms of projection. But Furby, how do you think you would end up stacking Manny Wilkins if he was named the starter?
I would probably aim for double stack still. Just because if he gets there, a couple of receivers, kind of the correlation. But, he's cheap enough. So I'll still have to figure that out. Maybe see what the Sims think. So kind of undetermined there. Just the data point from last year, whenever McCarron missed, they had Nick Tiano start and he played the entire game. They didn't, rotate anybody else out. I don't remember who the third string was. But, I would just, we'll have to see on how confident we are that Wilkins is going to play the whole game.
Yeah. Certainly a lot could change there in the next, 5, 6, 7 hours. I do think doubling Wilkins is maybe a bit more viable than I initially thought, if only because you get just massive salary savings from McCarron relative to him. So, like a Wilkins, Butler, Pearson team is, impossible if you swap Wilkins for McCarron. You can't really fit anyone else good in there. But Neil, I'll throw it over to you. Thoughts on stacking Wilkins?
Yeah, I'm definitely, I'm willing to stack it up either way. I don't think I'm playing him naked. Again, we're making a bet on the passing game. So I would be playing him with at least one receiver, but I'd probably have a mix of single and double stacks is probably the way I'm going to play it with Manny Wilkins. Definitely, I would be less inclined to play any of these receivers in non-Wilkins lineups. So my guess is that my overall exposure to the passing game goes down without AJ McCarron. But I'm still willing to go. I'm not saying I'm not playing them outside of Wilkins stacks, but because he is so cheap, like it makes it a lot more likely that if one of these receivers gets there, you're going to want the quarterback with him. I think I would be less inclined to do Furby and I both just said that we like to stack up these St. Louis receivers without McCarron. I'd be less inclined to do that with Manny Wilkins at quarterback because he's so much cheaper than McCarron. So I think that I'll sprinkle these guys in my non-Wilkins lineups, but I'm probably not going to do nearly as much having multiple receivers from St. Louis without the quarterback this week as I do with McCarron. But I'll still have shares of $4,500 Steven Mitchell. I'll still have shares of Ja'Cory Pearson. They seem to be targeting him quite a bit. I agree with Furby. We go back to Aitman once again, continue making that bet. I guess the concern there is that Steven Mitchell may have earned himself a bigger role, but they're very different receivers. Aitman, just a really big-bodied guy, and then Hakeem Butler. It's tougher because he's probably the one that I would discount the most because he's so expensive, and we haven't really seen can he do it without without the quarterback, without AJ McCarron there. One other thing that I'm thinking about is like, the backup quarterback, backup receiver connection. Does Stephen Mitchell get more of a bump playing with Manny Wilkins because they might have a little bit more of a connection there?
Is that like a provable thing?
I don't know if that's a provable.
Is that real? I know Johnny Proctor's all Proctor's all about that. Like he's talked about that before, and I'm pretty sure he's not joking. So maybe there is some data that backs that up, but I haven't seen anything significant. It makes sense as a narrative, though. So maybe you could argue for mixing in a little bit more Stephen Mitchell in there with your Manny Wilkins teams. And I'm with Neil. I think I would set a limit, at least among the expensive St. Louis wide receivers. So guys like Aitman, Pearson, Shepard, Butler, no more than one in a lineup that doesn't have Manny Wilkins. I think I'd be more okay with like a Butler Mitchell team than there's no way I want like Butler and Pearson on a non-Manny Wilkins team. Here. Jacob Saylors, I think we can get through pretty quickly. He's just a really strong play. I think regardless of who's at quarterback, Jacob Saylors is a really strong play. He's been top 2 in weighted opportunity in each of the last 4 weeks. If you just take his workload since he became a bell cow and extrapolate it out to a full season, it would be the second best full season workload by weighted opportunity in modern spring football history. Furby, what are your thoughts on Jacob Saylors?
Yeah, I'm gonna have a lot, and I think it's a great spot for him. I don't think ownership's going to be out of control. It's going to be high, but I mean, it's merited. It's hard to, the running back slot. It's hard to get points consistently. Yeah, I don't think he's going to be switch roles with Gallman. I'm not positive about that, but I think his role is as secure as anyone in the league for running back. So I'm definitely going to have quite a bit of Sailors.
Yeah, I think I will as well. The nice thing with Sailors is that because John Lovett is also projecting as such a strong play, like Furby said, ownership is going to be pretty reasonable here. Neil, any final thoughts on Sailors before we move on to the final game of the slate?
Yeah, I mean, Sailors is just a slam dunk here. This is a defense that over the past 3 weeks is giving up 160 rushing yards per game. Yes, 160 rushing yards per game. Now they get one of the better rushing attacks facing them. So he's 9,500, but yeah, I'm probably going to be, we have him only at 29% ownership now. I'll be overweight to 29% on Jacob Saylor. This is just an absolute smash spot. I'm very in on it.
All right. Good stuff, guys. Now we can move on to our final game of the slate. It's the Arlington Renegades at the San Antonio Brahmas. Total here is 46. Arlington is a 3-point underdog. This game kicks off at 4 p.m. To me, this line feels about right. I do see some value on Arlington, but I don't think I'm going to bet it. I certainly can't go against our Brahmas. Neil, I assume you are, of course, backing the Brahmas in this game. Any other thoughts on the line?
I am obviously backing the Brahmas. Honestly, the 46-point line, I was hoping for a little bit of a lower line here to take advantage of it. It's tough. If Chase Garbers were here at quarterback, I'd probably take the over. It's just been really tough for Quentin Dormady, so I don't think I can take the over in this one. I'll take the Brahmas because they're my team, but honestly, I don't see any great value here.
Furby, what about you?
I guess I'll take the Brahmas too. Yeah, not a ton of convictions. I guess one note I was thinking about earlier on the in-game betting is, these defenses just don't have the conditioning, as like NFL teams do. So I think a lot of times the games start kind of a little bit of a slog, and between the conditioning and the defenses getting tired and the rules, and the kickoffs too, lots of times we'll start at the 50 or the other, 50-yard line. So I like waiting a little while and then hammering the over on certain games when, if the total gets down to like 28 or 30, it's like, let's hit the over here. And then, defenses get tired, stuff starts happening, they get great field position. But in terms of this game specifically, no real hot takes.
Yeah, I think teams also get a little more desperate to pass in the second half of these games. Maybe playing from behind a little bit, just need to up the pass rate here. So there was no injury report for this game pre-show, but I actually just got it. Couple interesting notes here. Letty Brown has not practiced, so I would be looking at him to be inactive. Probably Devin Darrington as your backup behind Davion Smith. On the San Antonio side, Anthony McFarland has practiced in full 2 days in a row, both Wednesday and Thursday. So it looks like we're going to have to project him in terms of how that's going to affect things. I think John Lovett is still going to end up being the guy here, but I would be concerned that McFarland would steal some pass game work. And of course, that was part of what made Lovett's role so valuable. We'll talk about that a little bit more shortly, but another interesting piece of news, Landon Akers dealing with a concussion. Doesn't look like he's going to play. That would be worth a minor boost to Marquez Stevenson, who's getting bumped out a little bit of that slot role from Landon Akers. I still think Stevenson has an unreported injury or something because he has just looked a little slow on tape since week 5. Final injury note here. Justin Smith dealing with a calf injury. He also has not practiced. So I think that would be worth a significant boost for a guy like Katie Cannon, who could take up that outside role. That might be something I need to think about a little bit more here. But we will start with the Renegades side, talking about this game. I kind of want to show a little bit of love for Luis Perez. I mean, we saw the massive game last week. We know Perez has a great ceiling. And, the nice thing is these, wide receivers are pretty condensed. We have a good idea of who's going to catch passes. So Furby, I'll throw it over to you. How do you feel about Luis Perez? And then, more broadly speaking, these Arlington wide receivers?
Yeah, I've timed Perez pretty well this year. I was kind of off him all year just because he has 0 rushing, almost literally. He has like a couple rushes for the entire season. And last week, my lineup in second had Perez and stacked him up. Just because they're, like you said, it's so condensed. Like the last 3 weeks, the targets: Sal Cannella 24, Peyton 22, Tyler Vaughn's 18, Burnett 15. Running backs have a few, and after that, Seth Green 3. So you know where you're going. Burnett's a little thin. Maybe another guy that this game you pivot to, but I definitely. And Perez also has, we know he's going to start the whole game. He's going to lose a little bit of work to Lindsey Scott, but we know Perez is going to play from beginning and going to finish the game. So that's a rarity this week. So I'll definitely have Perez, and he's cheap enough.
Yeah, he is pretty cheap. That's the nice thing with these Perez doubles and triples is that you're really not paying much to get there, and you can capture a lot of upside. And like we've said on previous weeks, you use pretty much any sim tool, they're going to push you to a good amount of Perez. It just seems like Perez is a pretty solid quarterback in the eyes of the simulations. Neil, what are your thoughts on Luis Perez and then these pass catching options?
Not going to be a huge stand for me. We've got him projected for around 12% ownership. My guess is that I end up, somewhere in that 10 to 15% range with Luis Perez. I think that he's certainly in play. Agree with Furby. Love the condensed offense here. Makes it a lot easier. I will play. You say Burnett is a little bit thin. I'm still willing to take those shots just because the ownership is so low. We have seen him, have decent games here and there. Yeah, the target share a little bit light, but 15 targets over the past 3 weeks. He's only 6,300. So I will go back there just because he is getting so little ownership. Now, of course, I said that last week. We saw Cannella getting 20% ownership, which I think was spot on. I think he came in like right where we had him projected. And I was like, well, I'm just going to play Burnett for a few $100 more, reduced ownership. Of course, regretted that in a big way last week. I'm going to make that same mistake, I think, this week. I think I'm going to be overweight to Deontay Burnett, underweight to. We have Sal Cannella getting quite a bit of ownership now. So yeah, I'm playing all these guys. I'll have some Luis Perez again, probably not taking a huge stand right around the field, but I am going to largely, I think, inverse ownership where we have Burnett and Vaughn's being the lowest owned. I still like JP Payton at relatively low ownership as well. Actually, let me look at our updated ownership. 19% JP Payton feels fine to me. Not taking a huge stand there. I'll probably still be underweight to 28% of Sal Cannella. Probably be overweight to 5% Burnett, overweight to 4% Tyler Vaughn's is probably how I'm playing this. And I think with Luis Perez, you're definitely, I'm going to be more inclined to double stack with Luis Perez just because his receivers are relatively inexpensive and he doesn't do a lot on the ground.
Yeah. I think that is pretty reasonable. I'm kind of with you where I think I also want to inverse ownership and play a little bit more Vaughns, a little bit more Burnett, be a little bit underweight Canella. And I mean, Neil, you should have known to play Canella after I specifically called his ceiling into question. I mentioned that he had never had a game over 18 DraftKings points, and of course he immediately had to correct me on that.
Yeah.
So that's how it goes sometimes. But I think all these, you could really make an argument that any of these Arlington wide receivers are a pretty strong play. Beyond that, though, I was really impressed last week, not as much with the score, which was the highest running back score we saw of any player, 35.6 DraftKings fantasy points. Again, highest running back score of the year from Davion Smith. I was actually far more impressed with the raw usage. They had 3 running backs active, and that was a sign to me that this was going to be more of a gross committee. But Smith still managed 93% of backfield weighted opportunity, 87% of snaps, and an 82% route share. Prior to week 7, he had never earned more than 61% of backfield weighted opportunity, 54% of snaps, or route share higher than 53% in a game where there were other healthy Arlington running backs. Obviously, the game where Day Hunter got hurt, a bit of an exception there. This isn't just, an outlier score for Davion Smith. It is outlier usage for Davion Smith, which is extremely encouraging to me. Furby, I'll throw it over to you. How are you guys sort of viewing Davion Smith? To me, he's a bit of a tricky projection where, obviously we don't expect him to be hyper efficient like he was last week, but it does seem clear that there's been a bit of a shift in this offense towards them viewing Smith as a bit of a bell cow.
Yeah, last week it was easy to write off the high usage because they just had week 6, I think it was, they had just him and Day got hurt in the first quarter. So he was the only running back available. So he had 70% of the rushing market share. And last week he had 84, and we currently have him. Let's see where we have him. We have him for 53%. A little bit of a hedge because he's just been kind of splitting with whoever's been there all year until the last week. So I'll probably have some. It's the last game. Maybe swap to him if. Well, now you got me a little bit shook with McFarland, so we'll have to. Well, that one's up in the air. We'll just have to see on that. But if McFarland doesn't play, then maybe switch some of Lovett over to one of the Arlington running backs.
Yeah. I think that definitely makes sense.
If you need to pivot, that is.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing with Smith too is I would kind of expect his projections across the industry to come up a bit if Letty Brown is ruled out and they only go with 2 running backs. I imagine most sites would give at least some of that work to Davion. So even the 17% or so projected ownership that we have may end up coming up slightly. Neil, what are your thoughts on Davion Smith this week?
Yeah, I've said before, and I'll say it again. I like playing Davion Smith when he's getting no ownership and just bet on the volume. When we've got him at 17% ownership against a decent San Antonio rush defense, giving up about 85 yards per game over the past few weeks, I'm going to be out on Davion Smith. He's up to 7,300. He might get the volume even with that volume. I mean, even last week, you saw some of the plays. It was he broke a tackle and then just looked like he was running so slowly after. I think he had a 40-yard play. It was kind of insane to see him get that far down the field, but he doesn't really have a lot of pop. So if the field is going to be there on Davion Smith, and I consider the 17% to me feels like too much ownership going to Davion Smith. And if that goes up with Letty Brown out, all the better. I'll just full fade Davion Smith, make the bet against the, I don't think he has a ton of pop right now. So probably underweight to Davion Smith either way, not playing anybody else from this backfield.
Yeah. I think that's definitely an interesting stand to take. I'll certainly be underweight Davion Smith. I'm not sure I'm going to totally remove him from my player pool, but I mean, like we've noted in previous weeks, there's a pretty big risk that Lindsey Scott could come inside the 10 and steal, the touchdowns that Davion Smith really does need in order to get you there. Although it was a little encouraging that his, route share was so high last week. So he might be able to add a few more targets on top of it. I mean, he's a tough one, but I do think I'll end up coming in underweight, especially if, we end up having to bump his ownership up even further here. All right, moving on to our final team here at San Antonio, and kind of similar to St. Louis. I mean, this is going to have to be a bit more of a hypothetical discussion than I would like. We can start with the pass catchers here. I mean, Quentin Dormady hasn't looked very good, and they're also really not leaning into him as a passer. They've been much more of a rushing team since he took over, I think largely because he just hasn't looked that great. Yeah, Dormady, he's tough. I do still like Jontre Kirkland quite a bit. Jontre Kirkland just feels incredibly due for a big game. I think once we get the news that McCarron's ruled out, I can pretty safely say that Kirkland is, either right there, or at least to me, I think a better play than a guy like Hakeem Butler if you're, paying up at wide receiver. Furby, I'll throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on Dormady and then these San Antonio pass catchers? Obviously, with the news that Justin Smith may end up sitting, I did just double check, by the way. I'm pretty confident in saying that it would be Katie Cannon stepping into a significant role there, potentially 90% route share, which would be pretty great at just 3,000. So yeah, Furby, what are your thoughts?
I'm pretty much off of Dormady. I'm a little surprised for sticking with him. And on that note, we're kind of mostly basing that off. We all thought Hogan would probably start, and I was pretty excited to play him at 8K. But we're kind of basing that off a Monday comment that Phillips said that Dormady's still the starter. That could be a coach speak thing. And as the week goes on, maybe we do end up getting Kevin Hogan, or at least midway through the game. So that's something. We haven't seen the depth chart yet. That could be a surprise that we see. But yeah, I was hoping to see Hogan because Dormady's just been inaccurate, and just like last year he was just such a wild card on Orlando in the XFL. You didn't know for sure what he was going to do, and he had some really bad games and some really all over the place. Partly because Orlando didn't really have a structure, and I think maybe they're trying to put him into a structure in San Antonio here. It's not really quite his game, and I think Hogan would be a little more accurate on those short passes that Dormady has been really poor at, and they just haven't pushed him like we thought San Antonio was going to in the passing game. So that being said, Arlington is second worst, has the second most passing yards against. So none of these San Antonio receivers are going to be that owned. I think this is a great place to swap to and just be contrary. And I'm going to have a lot of them to start, even if maybe I don't have a ton of Dormady, because I just or much at all, just because I think the in-game benching is a risk. And I think like Kirkland's going to be the lowest owned. We've seen him in a great matchup, and Akers even. I don't know. That might be a deep pivot if because he started getting a little bit of work last week, and they were looking at him. But Stevenson and Justin. You said Justin Smith looks like he's going to be out. I hadn't seen that. Okay.
Yeah, he hasn't practiced this week.
That would definitely condense things a little more. So. And Latimer too. So I mean, he's always a great pivot. I mean, certainly an upside.
Yeah, I really like the take that these guys are all great late swap options, because I'm looking at our projected ownership. We don't have any of these wide receivers projected higher than 6% ownership. So no one's really going to want to play these guys. I do think Kirkland will come up a little bit for us once McCarron's ruled out, because again, people will be looking to get off Butler a little bit more. If you're paying up, would probably lean a bit more into Kirkland, but we could also get a great salary saving option in this game with Katie Cannon. He feels kind of pretty similar to Justin Smith before Quentin Dormady took over, where it's like, look, in a lot of scenarios, he's just going to zero. But he could also catch a long touchdown. And at 3,000, I mean, what do you need? 5-6 points, and you're in a pretty good spot. And like we said with these other tight end punts, he allows you to get up to builds that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So certainly need to keep an eye out for that news. Neil, what are your thoughts on the San Antonio passing attack here?
Yeah, so I'll say I listened to the Wednesdays with Wade. He's still saying, Wade Phillips is still saying, this is our starting quarterback. We still have full faith. He compared the backup quarterback to being like a reliever in baseball. Yeah, sometimes if the starter's not getting it done, you just bring in a reliever, but he's still our guy. We still have full faith in Quentin Dormady. Like Furby says, that might just be coach speak. That just happened to be later in the week. He's just still doing the coach speak thing. Obviously, I would be more excited about it if we could go to the forget who the backup quarterback is now.
Kevin Hogan.
Kevin, yeah, I was also like assuming it was going to be Kevin Hogan, excited about Kevin Hogan, but I think I'm willing to go back to Dormady, and I don't think I'm just being a homer here. Maybe I am just really wanting him to be good. But I think I don't mind playing a wild card. I think if he's going to have good games, I think this is a good spot to do it against this Arlington defense. So I think that he is definitely a risk to be benched if he's not doing well. But again, because of the great matchup, I think that he's more likely to do well than he would in other games. And then they'd be more likely to. And obviously, you're playing for the best case scenario in these large field GPPs. So yeah, obviously you're not playing him in a small field. You're not playing him in a cash game setting. But in the largest field GPP, I think that he is in play. And we have him projected for under 7% ownership. So I'm in on Dormady at that price in this matchup and with these receivers, because I really do like these San Antonio receivers still willing to make bets. And it is interesting. I mean, we'll have to see who is active for San Antonio with both Landon Akers and Justin Smith being potentially out. Would love Katie Cannon if we can play him at 3,000 and virtually. Probably still not a ton of ownership. I guess maybe that'll change. But Speedy Stevenson, I'm still willing to go there. I'm still willing to play some Jontre Kirkland, certainly Cody Latimer. So I'll be overweight to the field on Quentin Dormady, and probably overweight even outside those Quentin Dormady lineups to these San Antonio receivers.
Yeah, I think all that makes sense. And again, like I said earlier, I really like Furby's take on these guys as late swap options. I may end up trotting out a Dormady stack or two. I think especially with Katie Cannon. I mean, you could triple stack Dormady and spend almost no salary and still get up to the top running backs or the other strong receivers that we want to play. Speaking of top running backs, obviously John Lovett has been right there with Jacob Sailors as an uber bell cow over the last month or so. He's just looked really, really great, running the ball really well, and seeing a fantastic workload. Again, the one sort of wrench that you could, or the one hole that you could poke in John Lovett this week, is that it looks like Anthony McFarland is going to be back. He'll probably be the backup running back. I will be curious to see if San Antonio goes with 2 running backs or 3. That could also be a little bit telling. If they go with 2, that would obviously be a little bit better for Lovett. I would expect McFarland to be the backup, Morgan Ellison to be inactive if they did go with 2 running backs. But sort of like I said, I think McFarland would mostly impact Lovett's receiving role. And, this is a game where, especially if you expect the Brahmas to win, I really wouldn't be too worried about much of a role change for John Lovett. The other thing too that McFarland could serve to do is just totally not change Lovett's role at all. I mean, they might just say, hey, Lovett's still the bell cow. He's one of the best running backs in the league. We just want to feed him. And then all McFarland being active does is lower Lovett's ownership by maybe 10% versus what we currently have projected. So yeah, there are a few different angles you could look at this situation. Furby, how would you guys handle this if Anthony McFarland ended up being active?
Yeah, we'll have to look at the depth chart too, but I would guess they'd probably have Ellison inactive. They haven't been that interested in giving him carries anyway. He's just there because they need another running back. So I would give all his work and probably a little bit more. He was a starter to start the year, but it would certainly make Lovett riskier, and we might not get some of this news before, at least before people make their lineups. So Lovett's still probably going to come in pretty heavy. So going into that game, maybe you swap onto some of the receivers, make sure you have Lovett in the flex if you can, just that way you can get onto some of these lower end receivers. But Lovett would still be a really good play. If I'm leading, in a good spot, and Lovett's my running back, I'm going to stick with him even if McFarland's active.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. I think all that makes a lot of sense. It will certainly be interesting to see how they would handle McFarland rotating in here. Neil, what are your thoughts on this backfield?
Yeah, I think that it's probably just Lovett's backfield at this point. He's just been so good that I'm kind of hoping that McFarland does play and that it just lowers Lovett's ownership. I agree, like it does increase the risk. I totally agree with you that it increases the risk. But I'd be willing to take that shot, and I would hope for the lower ownership there. They've been riding him. 54 carries over the past 3 weeks, just insane volume for Lovett, involved in the running game. And this is, one of the better spots you can possibly have. Arlington giving up 126 rush yards per game. That's the second most over the past 3 weeks. Obviously, DC giving up 160 is way over the field, but then 126, Arlington still giving up quite a bit on the ground, and San Antonio, doing the same, putting up those rushing yards on other defenses. So I'm totally into Lovett. I'll be going right back there, just playing a ton of it. Lovett and Sailors to me just look like slam dunks at the running back position.
Yep. Yeah, I feel the same way as well. Curious if you guys have any other thoughts on late swap here. Just kind of looking through projected ownership. I think we largely covered it with Furby's take that these San Antonio guys are the best possible late swap options. Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say Burnett's a great late swap. I mentioned that before, and definitely try to get off Ty Scott. If you have a low scoring guy, there's definitely room with the contest size. You don't have to be perfect, but I mean, you don't want to leave a high end guy. You want to try to pass some people. So I'd get off Ty Scott. Go to kind of any of these guys in this last game here. I think it's a good spot to pivot.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Neil, anything else?
Yeah, no, I think that Furby nailed it, that this is going to be a game that you can really get onto these receivers. But really, we're going to just need to be paying attention to the news that comes out, because we don't know who's going to be active for San Antonio. So make sure you are paying attention to the news. And I think that we're going to be finding some great pivots here. I'm debating whether, where's the spot where I would pivot off of John Lovett to Anthony McFarland. I would have to really be in a spot where I need to make a pivot for that to be the case. That would probably be the only way I would ever play Anthony McFarland is if I'm really playing from behind. Maybe I'd go there in that case.
Man, I mean, and you would have to have Lovett as your only.
But I'd still probably just go to I'd have to be in the running back spot, because otherwise I'd rather just go to these receivers. I think.
Yeah, so that would be a pretty limited situation, but I think that's really solid late swap advice. I mean, obviously the big one, just get off Ty Scott. That's pretty much all you need to do to effectively late swap on Sunday. All right, before we get out of here, Furby, why don't you tell people where they can find you, where you work, your Twitter. Tell the audience where they can find you.
Yeah, on Twitter, Furby Hoobler. Sometimes I have some nuggets, but mostly, the Run the Sims Discord. And you can Run the Sims has Sims tools. They pair great, with the fantasy points, projections and everything. So get them both, work together. That's all I got.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things to do each week is to compare our projected ownership to your guys' optimal rate. I think that can generally give me a good sense as to who the lowest owned plays will be. So as always, guys, definitely check out Run the Sims. Tons of great products over there. Really, really love their stuff. And that does it for the longest winded UFL show imaginable. Thank you so much for tuning into the Week 8 edition of the UFL Breakdown. I will see you guys at the top of the leaderboards. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.